Jasiah Wagoner enters the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. And hey, the story of the day, Jasiah Wagoner, four-star cornerback out of the state of Washington, who played 1 year with the Oklahoma Sooners, entered the transfer portal, according to a report from Colin Kennedy of Sooners Illustrated, also confirmed by George Stoya of Sooner Scoop. So what do we make of that, Josh? It's a guy that had a lot of expectations. There was a lot of hype around him because of his athleticism, his quickness, but didn't work out necessarily with the Sooners.
Yeah, I make out of it that probably several of the other young cornerbacks leapfrogged in the rotation, and the addition of Des Malone out of the transfer portal, whether it was Jasiah Wagoner or anybody in that class a year ago, when you supplement out of the transfer portal, that takes away reps and it takes away opportunities. So somebody was missing out on reps and opportunities somewhere. And I just get the indication that probably Jasiah Wagoner felt like, okay, maybe the writing's on the wall for me a little bit, that a couple of other younger guys have passed me up, and it's time to go try my opportunity somewhere else. Oklahoma's over that 85 scholarship limit. So there were going to be, and will continue to be, some names that enter the transfer portal away from Oklahoma. And unfortunately, Jasiah Wagoner, who arrived with this big time reputation out of Washington as a blue chip signee, it won't turn into a career where he's a big time playmaker and contributor at OU, but wish him nothing but the best.
And he's going to have the opportunity to go somewhere and be productive and have a really strong college career. Just might not have been the best fit in a defense that wants to get long and tall at cornerback. I mean, the addition of Des Malone, Jacoby Johnson, Makari Vickers, Jeremiah Newcomb, Jocelyn Malaska, the Utah corner transfer. I mean, they added a lot of guys with length over the last couple of off seasons. Jaden Rowe is a guy from the 2022 signing class that we haven't really seen break out just yet, but heard positive things out of spring ball. And so, yeah, I mean, for a guy that's a little bit shorter in stature, like Jasiah Wagoner, it was going to be a little bit tough to break into the lineup and break into that rotation, especially as they went defensive back heavy over the last several cycles. It's a crowded cornerback room right now. And that's not to say that Jasiah Wagoner couldn't have developed into a player that contributed for the Sooners, but maybe it was going to take another off season or two before he was able to get to that point. Or maybe it was just one of those things where it's like, hey, the writing is on the wall. Time to go find another opportunity somewhere. And he will have opportunities because he's just very, very athletic. He's a good cover corner. And I think a lot of it was just the numbers crunch. The Oklahoma Sooners are up against the scholarship limit. They're over the scholarship limit, and they're trying to add guys as we speak. I mean, the Dominic Williams recruitment is still ongoing. And then there's noise that they're pursuing a Michigan State defensive tackle as well. So it's not like Oklahoma has room to work with. In fact, they've got to get a little bit negative so they can add some of these guys on to have scholarship room for them. But, I think this bodes well for the development of a Jacoby Johnson, of a Makari Vickers, and potentially shows you what you have in Des Malone and Kenai Walker, Gentry Williams, that your cornerback depth is at a point where, okay, you lose a blue chip talent, and man, you never want to see a blue chipper walk out the door. But because of the work that Jay Valai has done on the recruiting trail, you feel pretty good about cornerback moving forward.
Yeah, you do. And it's disappointing for Wagoner that it's not going to materialize into something to where he's a contributor. And obviously he leaves Oklahoma, the 7 games played in 23. 3 total tackles, a couple of PBUs, and the front half of the season there were injury concerns. So was never this big time playmaker at Oklahoma. It'll be interesting to follow and see where he winds up, where he resurfaces. I don't think that this means that Wagner's not a power 4 type guy. So I still think that that could be a possibility for him somewhere else. But that will be interesting to follow, is sort of how he's viewed now leaving Oklahoma by some of the other programs. OU won out over Arizona State, Cal, Notre Dame, and a bunch of other programs like that for both of the Arizona schools, for Jasiah Wagoner. So who's in the mix now for Wagner going forward? And the other interesting question will be, what other names will enter the portal from Oklahoma? Obviously, like you said, you want to get a Dominic Williams in here. That would be a big-time recruitment to win. By Job just entered the portal out of Michigan State that has obviously the in-state tie. So I don't know if that would be a name that Oklahoma feels they're still connected to or interested in, but was a very high-profile guy when he was coming out of Norman and coming out of high school at Community Christian at CCS. So there's still interesting names in the portal. Dominic Williams, we know Oklahoma's in the hunt there. And so this is the first of a couple of names that are going to enter the portal for Oklahoma. And as you pointed out, John, the corner position, I think one of the interesting things to me has been the reaction of the fan base. And as soon as you jump into the text line on the radio side tomorrow, my tune here could drastically change, John. But the early reaction and feedback I've seen with Jasiah Wagoner has not been 3 years ago with a player that hadn't contributed a lot and they enter the portal and it's, wait a second, what's going on here? It feels like the fan base kind of understands what this is with Jasiah Wagoner, that, hey, wish him the very best. Still think he has a chance. We'll see where he winds up and resurfaces, but still think he has a chance to play some serious college football somewhere. But for Oklahoma right now, this is kind of a reshape the roster type move for Oklahoma, and probably best for all parties.
The depth chart's tight. I mean, you look a lot of places and it's hard to find playing time for some of your 2022 and 2023 signees. I mean, you're not necessarily expecting or banking on any of those guys to be big time contributors, because you have a veteran defensive roster and it's just getting deeper by the year, by the offseason. And eventually that's going to put you in a position where you have to make some tough decisions or have to encourage some tough decisions if you're the Oklahoma Sooners football program. But a guy like Jasiah Wagoner, he's going to have opportunities to play somewhere. Cornerbacks and guys that can cover, they're not easy to find, especially guys that have the tools and the ability that he has. Again, football is a developmental game. It can take time for a guy to develop into a full-fledged starter at the collegiate level. And that's just kind of the reality of playing one of the most difficult positions in all of sports, in playing cornerback. So yeah, there's going to be opportunities for him. We're already seeing, like a guy like Cormani McClain. He spent a year at Colorado, was in the portal. Deion Sanders is acting like it's not a big deal that he's in the portal. And I don't think it's the same thing for the Sooners and Jasiah Wagoner. I think it's always a big deal to lose a blue chip player of that kind of talent. At the same time, he played fewer than 80 snaps for the Oklahoma Sooners, so you don't really know what you have going forward with him, and you feel good about the depth that you have on the roster at the position. So we'll see where Jasiah Wagoner ends up. I'm sure he's going to end up at a place where he's going to get an opportunity to play. And with the new transfer rules, I mean, he could go down to a group of 5, spot and then play a year and then be back into the Power 4 by the 2025 season. So who knows what's going to play out there. But like you said, Josh, there will be other names that do enter the portal between now and May 1 when the portal window closes.
Means
what?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but it does mean there's going to be a busy next couple of days, to follow, because there's going to be some movement here before that portal closes.
Yeah. And we'll keep you updated here on Locked On Sooners. So make sure you're tuned in and subscribed. Paul Finebaum made his first trek to Norman as the Oklahoma Sooners get ready to go into the SEC. Where did he feel like Oklahoma stood as it prepares for its venture into a new conference? We'll discuss that coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Paul Finebaum, ESPN fame, SEC fame, made the trip to Norman to take in Oklahoma's spring game weekend and festivities, and by all accounts, came away pretty impressed. Did a little Q&A session with the folks over at, over at Sooner Scoop?
The Oklahoman.
The Oklahoman. Sorry about that. Over at the Oklahoman, and to discuss just kind of where he felt like OU was ahead of that SEC entry. And first off, let's talk about how he feels about the coach. He said, well, what I saw stood out the most was a dramatic turnaround, and I think everyone expected a better year in his second year out. But I was really caught off guard by how well they played and how much in command and how much he had seemingly grown as a head coach from year one to year two. And I think for that reason, I feel very good about OU's future. I still think this team is a little bit shy of being a contender, but I don't think they're far off. And I think the transition to the SEC I think it's going to go fairly well. I know I remember the day the announcement came out 3 years ago. There was a lot of trepidation from everyone about how OU and Texas would fit. But I really think what happened last year, and especially beating Texas, I just think that was so critical to the momentum that this program really needed to add to the SEC.
Let's touch on the final portion of that first. Have we at times, because it's the OU Texas game, you always expect to or want to win it, right? But it was the year before was just a disaster class of epic proportions. With the way that turned around and turned out for Oklahoma the year before, and then the turnaround this season, how important was that win over Texas for OU? I mean, can you imagine the conversations that not necessarily you or I think we'd still be not sunshine pumping, but erring more on the side of optimism because of the way recruiting has gone than some out there. But the way the fan base would be talking and some of the angst in the fan base, there's plenty of angst to go around for what happened in Lawrence and what happened in Stillwater. And I know that there's an official call or two that fans would like to have, particularly in the last couple of trips to Stillwater back, or just to have seen that call made. But hey, it wasn't. And Oklahoma didn't play well enough in either Lawrence or Stillwater. The Arizona game, right? Looked like at one point maybe Oklahoma was going to win the game by multiple scores and kind of cruise to the offseason. And then lo and behold, they lose by a couple of scores. So there was already plenty of reasons to have some angst going into this offseason and into this next season. But if you had lost the Texas game again and lost it by multiple scores, that does on some level, I think, it absolutely has shaped positivity for Oklahoma fans. And I think Paul's right on that.
Yeah, even had you lost that game by 3, you get the ball back down 30-27 and you're trying to drive in the final minute 19 and you come up short. or you miss a field goal. I mean, you'd feel bummed out about missing a field goal, but you weren't supposed to be in that game to begin with. It wasn't supposed to be close. Had you lost, I don't think anybody'd be claiming any moral victories, but you'd feel a little bit better about the direction of the program, especially after 49-0 in 2022. But that you won the game, and the way you won the game in such dramatic fashion, it did provide more optimism. And I think that's probably part of the reason why everybody was so disappointed in the Kansas loss and in the Oklahoma State loss, was because of the way that they played against Texas. They rose to the occasion against Texas. Jeff Levy, Brent Venables, Ted Roof, the players, the coaching staff, everybody rose to the occasion against Texas. And then, yeah, you lost Danny Stutzman for a half against Kansas. Yeah, he was out against Oklahoma State, but you couldn't figure out a way to win either of those games despite that. Well, I mean, that's part of that building that competitive depth thing that wasn't quite there. Obviously, Jeff Levy was kind of a part of the Kansas loss in that he didn't put the ball in his quarterback's hands. The Oklahoma State loss, some of the play calls at the end of the game came into question. And so, had you lost that Texas game and also lost Kansas and Oklahoma State, I think people would be feeling less optimistic or less confident about where Oklahoma's going. And if you lost that Arizona game and you were 9-4 versus 10-3, you might be feeling a little bit differently, but it'd just be marginally different. It's still a team that's recruiting really, 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 really well all offseason. Every offseason and every recruiting class Oklahoma's had under Brent Venables has been a top 8 class so far. And I don't think that that's going to change this year either. I think they're going to continue to push for a top 8 recruiting class in 2025. Even though it might be one of their smallest classes so far, I think it's still going to have enough star power to push them into that top 8 category, but they recruit well. And so as they continue to recruit well and they continue to build that depth chart, you've got to feel optimistic about where Oklahoma's heading. I think, that Texas win was huge. And I think Paul Finebaum's right on this. Like, Brent Venables just looks like a more in control coach. He looks like he has a better understanding of what his role and responsibilities are on game day throughout the week, getting his team prepared and being that kind of quote unquote CEO head coach. And that's part of the reason he brought Zach Alley in, was to take that step even further this year.
It is worth pointing out that, again, and I think we mentioned this at some point last season when some other positive remark was made by Paul Finebaum. Since this thing has gone official and it's truly imminent, Paul Finebaum's making the rounds on the campus and saying all sorts of nice things about Oklahoma. What episode of the Twilight Zone are we living in? It's like, do you remember the early 2010s? And at times, Paul Finebaum admittedly was proven correct in his doomscasting for Oklahoma and his grandstanding for the SEC. I mean, I'll give him that at times he was proven correct, but this is somebody that was not this great supporter of the University of Oklahoma on a number of turns. And yet now all of a sudden I feel like I'm taking crazy pills because the guy's saying things that make sense, that I agree with. He's I don't know. It's just a little wacky.
Now that we're in the SEC, all of a sudden we agree with Paul Finebaum. I don't know what to make of this either. I do remember driving around West Oklahoma in Duncan and where we lived at the time. And Paul Finebaum was one of the few sports radio shows that you could get down there in Duncan consistently on ESPN radio. And I'm like, why is this guy on in Western Oklahoma? We're not even close to the SEC. And all I get to hear about is SEC football nonstop for 2-3 hours a day. And I was like, I don't know what's happening, as I longed for Dallas Fort Worth sports radio at the time. So yeah, it is kind of crazy, but it's one of those things that this move has created kind of new family, new friends. And the people that you railed against for so long, okay, now you're going to be sharing the table with them a little bit. Bob Stoops, who confidently said, "Hey, we're as good as the SEC." Well, now he's going to be sharing the SEC or sharing the table with SEC guys, and at some point, I'm sure they'll get Stoops and Saban together on a panel at some point to talk SEC football, and that'll be quite the sight. The two of the bigger name coaches over the last 25 years that kind of helped shape college football are both now going to be talking SEC football on a regular basis. It's wild.
Just one thing more here on the Paul Finebaum stuff. I loved what he said about the trophy case at Oklahoma had a profound effect on him. That if you missed that, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said, being around and seeing Oklahoma's trophy case, you forget how full it is and the type of championship program that's coming to the SEC. I thought that was pretty cool to hear Paul Finebaum say that. And then just in this little note, I don't know that I disagree with I still think this team is a little bit shy of being a contender, but I don't think they're far off. And I think the transition to the SEC I think it's going to go fairly well. End quote. I think let's revisit in what would it be, 8 months time or so. But I think that will be a solid take, that Oklahoma coming out of this next season. Yeah, they're good. Were they championship quality good in the SEC? Maybe not quite yet, but they're close. And there's a positive transition that we saw happen. Unlike so many folks that want to try and sell you this narrative that Oklahoma's about to be Nebraska turned into the SEC.
Yeah, I think a few things go right for them at certain positions and they have breakout, performances. I mean, they're close. I mean, I hate to use the "we're close" mantra because that's dirty words. I'm going to get a community reviewed here for using the "we're close," but they have pieces that just need to step up and step into roles, and potentially they could be a playoff contender, find themselves contending for an SEC title berth as they enter November. I mean, that November stretch is going to be absolutely critical to their playoff chances, SEC title chances. But I mean, the talent is continuing to build in Norman, and the spring showcased a lot of that and a lot of what's coming up for the Sooners and who's going to have breakouts. But let's continue to talk spring ball, who stood out, who were some of the top performers, biggest surprises coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. Monopoly Go. Get in on the action. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit Monopoly or mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Again, thank you so much for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Hit that notification button to let you know when new episodes drop. The other day, we talked spring MVPs. We mentioned Deion Burks. We mentioned Jaden Jackson. We talked about guys like Danny Stutzman and Ethan Downs. But who had the spring that surprised you the most, Josh?
The spring that surprised me the most, I would say, and this probably won't shock you to hear me say this, given the last couple of days together here, but I think I was most pleasantly surprised by what I saw from Grayson Halton in the spring game. I think he has a chance to genuinely help Oklahoma. And beforehand, I felt like anytime we said his name, I was just hopefully mentioning it. But after what we saw in the spring game, I don't feel that it's just hopeful optimism anymore. I feel like I've seen some substance to go with it for Oklahoma, that he's got a chance to help OU. Now, did he have the greatest spring for Oklahoma? I don't know about all that, but it surprised me the most with what I saw. I would say just thine eyes in the spring game. Grayson Halton would be the singular player for me.
And I think that's a guy that needs to have a breakout. You don't have a lot of defensive tackle depth. That's why you're going after a guy like Dominic Williams, but you need somebody that has the quickness and athleticism and that burst off the line of scrimmage and the ability to split through the gap and shoot the gap and create plays in the backfield. You need to have that. I mean, we've seen guys like Ethan Downs be able to do it, but we haven't seen anybody on the interior be able to do that with much consistency in creating tackles for loss, creating pressure on the quarterback. But if Grayson Halton can be that guy, it really does help take Oklahoma's defense to another level, because you've been good, fairly good against the run on the interior. You've been pretty good against the run on the edges at linebacker. You haven't had a consistent pass rush yet. And that's really the thing that needs to happen for Oklahoma's defense to take another step forward. And to that end, I've been excited to hear that R. Mason Thomas is looking like R. Mason Thomas, the guy that we've kind of expected to have a breakout, or had a breakout last year. We were hoping it was going to happen, but injuries really limited him. It took him, off the shelf for most of the season, and he never really got back to the player that we expected him to be. But according to everything that we're hearing and all that's going on at spring camp and what we saw in the spring game, I mean, R. Mason Thomas looks like a guy that is ready to take off, and hopefully he can stay healthy all off season. And if he can, I mean, you're looking at a breakout potential player.
I'm with you. The other big surprise has got to be Michael Boganowski. Now, you almost, in some way, the couple of names that we've mentioned are guys that have been around for a little bit. And I think that's maybe almost a little bit more fair to start there, because, anybody that's coming in fresh, right, as a freshman, it's to some degree less of a surprise because, well, we just haven't seen these guys at all yet. They haven't had any chance on campus. Now, having said that, I'll give a tip of the cap to Parker Thune, who anytime you asked along the recruiting process, hey, who's the unheralded name in this set of commits for Oklahoma? Who's the unheralded name once they became signees in this signing class for Oklahoma? He was quick to say Michael Boganowski. Every stop on the train, every stop, it was Michael Boganowski. And so far, he's looking pretty smart with that, based on what we saw in the spring game. That was a surprise that he was that impactful and that violent that quickly.
And I'm going to throw Parker another shout out here. I know people like to rail on Parker for missed crystal balls and predictions and future casts and whatnot, but not long after I started hosting Locked On Sooners in 2020, Parker joined the show and talked about how Caleb Williams was going to take Spencer Rattler's starting quarterback job. And lo and behold, he went and did that. And now Caleb was the first pick in the NFL draft on Thursday night. And then, hey, got to give a shout out to Tyler Guyton, who went number 29 overall to the Dallas Cowboys. Get some more pass protection from my man Dak. Give him time to get the ball to CD. So that's exciting. Tyler Guyton, a guy that's really young at the position still, being able to go and get drafted in the first round. And that's back-to-back first-round draft picks for offensive line coach Bill Bedenbaugh and the Oklahoma Sooners.
Boom, baby. Coach B just stacking them up, and no big deal. Just added to the big pile of cash from Sooner offensive linemen in the National Football League. So as many groans and grinches at times as there have been for Oklahoma's offensive line and concerns, we talked a lot about those. That was one of the narratives of the spring. Coach Bedenbaugh, one thing has proven to be true is that he gets guys paid. If not as these last couple of years as first-round draft picks, guys develop and they stick around and get paid in the National Football League under the tutelage of Coach Bill Bedenbaugh. So just another feather in the cap for Coach B. And you always hope that when you do get that first-round draft pick like Oklahoma's had, offensive line each of the past two NFL draft cycles here, look, let's go get some blue chippers. I mean, come on. Do you guys not see the results? This is offensive line you, baby. This is Coach B. You want a big pile of cash, then come to Oklahoma.
Ryan Foje's in the boat just for that, or for in large part because of that reason. Now, hey, Michael Fasusi, Ty Haywood, hope you're paying attention out there to what's going on at Oklahoma and OLU. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in, being a part of the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast, free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Follow Josh on Twitter at JoshOnRef. Check him out Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on the KREF Sports app. I'm John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. But until next time, he's Josh. I'm John. Boomer Sooner.